Welcome to the Beauty and Battle podcast, where we talk about winning in marriage by waging a war. I'm Jason Benham. I've got my girlfriend/wife, Tori Benham, with me, and we are here to talk to you about how Satan tries to get you to fight face-to-face with your spouse, but God designed you to fight shoulder-to-shoulder against Satan so that you can win in your marriage. Fighting together draws you together. We cannot wait to jump in, so here we go. So today we're talking about connecting through vulnerability.
Yes.
It's kind of a crazy title, but it really does make sense as we talk through it, because we're going to dive deep into talking about intimacy in marriage.
Right.
And if you remember, intimacy is to be fully known and fully accepted. And you can't be fully known unless you're vulnerable.
Right.
But you won't be vulnerable unless you feel safe.
Exactly.
So we're going to talk
very
about
tied together.
Yeah. We want to talk about how both of those tie together, and then leave you with 3 keys that I think is really going to help your relationship. It's helped Tori and I, and she's reading this really awesome book. She'll get into that in a second. But let's start by doing our song.
Yes.
Tori picked out this song, by the way.
We're in December now, and so Christmas is underway, and we're all about the Christmas music in our house. So we're going to play one of our favorite love Christmas songs.
Yeah, favorite love song. Now, there's so many renditions of this.
True.
Mariah Carey does one, and I cannot listen to it.
I love it.
No, it's just not good. And I think, and you guys probably remember, it was a New Year's Eve ball drop thing
Oh, boy.
Mariah Carey sang at like 5 years ago, and she didn't know the words to her own song, and then they realized she was lip singing.
Yeah, it was
and I think she was
debacle.
high or something. I don't know exactly what it was.
There was a lot happening that day.
Yeah,
that evening.
Poor girl. Anyway, I don't like her version of this, and there's so many other people that do versions of this, but I grew up in Texas, which is where people wore belt buckles and boots and Wranglers, to Christmas parties, and Resistol Stetson hats, cowboy hats, like the straw kind.
Yep.
And I grew up in Texas, where the main version of this song is the one that I want to play for you right now. All I Want for Christmas by Vince Vance and the Valiants.
Okay,
I'm not going to play the whole song, just a little piece.
A little
Ready?
teaser.
All right. All right, that's it. That's all I can take.
I love it. Do you know what's so funny about the Mariah Carey one, which you said you don't love? I think it's got a great beat, but it starts out by saying, I don't want a lot for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I don't want a lot for Christmas. And then, but all I want is you. It's like, it's like kind of funny. I saw a meme on it the other day, like, please don't play this one for me. It says, I don't want a lot for Christmas.
But I want you, which means you're not a lot.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
So
I actually didn't get that until you just brought that up.
Yeah. So maybe subconsciously you were really harboring those thoughts. You didn't feel wanted when I played it for you.
Yeah. And since this is a marriage podcast, the whole "all I want for Christmas is you" kind of thing, I don't know a husband out there that hasn't said that to his wife. Like, oh, come on. All I really want is you. Just, go buy yourself something and come back and we'll be fine. Okay, I'm not going to go any deeper than that.
Moving on.
Okay, so let's go back into intimacy, because all throughout the scripture we see intimacy is a key topic that God is like, I want to be intimate with you.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be intimate with you, but you have to open up. Revelation 3:20, that classic verse, behold, I stand at the door and knock. He who opens up the door, I will come in and dine with him and he with me. So God is knocking on the door of our heart, and he's saying, open up. Mm-hmm. But we don't want to open up. Why? Because there's too much mess. We feel like we got to clean up before we open up.
Yep.
And God's like, I don't want you to clean up. What you got to understand is I accept you just like you are. I just need you to be willing to open up and be vulnerable to me.
Right.
And so, and I did this in our Living Among Lions live stream last Thursday. By the way, if you don't ever listen to that, go on @Benham Brothers on Thursday mornings at 8:00 Eastern. Mm-hmm. And my brother and I do Living Among Lions, How to Thrive Like Daniel in Today's Babylon. So we talk about a lot of good stuff. But I did talk about intimacy and how God wants us to be intimate. And how in that verse, Revelation 3:20, when God is knocking on the door of our heart and we hear that knock, Can you imagine if you're like a college student and you're in your not dorm. Let's say you got your own townhome, and all of a sudden you hear a knock at the door, and you look out the hole, and there's Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something playing on the TV that should not be. You've got like a grinder on the coffee table. You've got like vape stuff everywhere. I don't even know how to talk the language. Magazines that shouldn't be there, and people doing stuff that is not good. Instantly, you don't want to open the door because if you open the door, he's going to see all that stuff.
Right.
And you don't open it. And then Jesus keeps knocking, and he's like, hey, I know you're wanting to clean up whatever's in there, but here's what I want you to do. Just open. That's all you got to do. Just be vulnerable and open up and let me in. And the rest of that verse says, and then when I come in, I'm going to dine with you and you with me. Dining is an experience of intimacy. That the way that we grow in our relationships, and all of us can see this, is through having a meal together.
Yeah.
Like if Tori and I go on a date night, what are we going to do? We're going to go to dinner. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to do. It's when you're eating together. Jesus, the Last Supper, right before he went to the cross, that's a picture of intimacy. And Jesus says that if you open up and you be vulnerable, you and I are actually going to be intimate, which means I will fully know you. I'll see everything. Yeah. Now, of course, God already sees everything, but he wants us to be willing to let him see everything. I see everything, but I'm not going to look at that stuff. I'm going to look right at you as we eat on your table. Mm-hmm. Like, do you have any ramen noodles laying around? Like, what do you got? Let's eat together. That is a picture of what we're supposed to do relationally with our spouse.
Right.
It's your wife is knocking on the door of your heart, husband.
Mm-hmm.
Open up and let her in. Okay, wife, your husband is knocking on the door of your heart. Open up and let him in. Do not hide anything.
Yeah, it's so good. And, it requires a level of risk.
Yes,
and
that's the scary part.
That's the scary part. And just like you're telling the story, Jesus comes, he knocks on the door. If I let him in, what will happen? What will be his response? Right? Like it requires a level of risk. And when you let Christ in and you experience true forgiveness, you experience true mercy, true grace, and you experience Jesus, then you now have an experience that nobody can take from you.
Yeah.
To where you're like, okay, that worked. I'm letting him back in. And I think it's this because there's safety in Christ. Mm-hmm. And you only learn that through experience. Yeah. And in relationships, it's the same way. We're gonna have experiences in our lives that are not safe. And then it make us feel unsafe the next time another experience shows up or another situation shows up. And that requires risk. Yeah. And in our relationships, we failed each other so many times. And so now it requires risk because I failed you before. Will I fail you again? I don't know. You're going to have to let me in to know. And so there is a level of risk that you take when you're vulnerable.
To be fully known, you have to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable, you have to feel safe.
Yes.
So that's why we have to find, safety, that's security. That's our number one core human need.
Yes.
So if you've read our book, the 5 core human needs that we got from Dr. Kathy Cook, psychologist, just world renowned, child psychologist and relationship psychologist. 5 core needs: security, identity, belonging, purpose, and competence.
Yeah.
Security answers the question, who can I trust? Identity answers the question, who am I? Belonging answers the question, who wants me?
Right.
Purpose answers the question, why am I alive? Competence answers the question, what am I good at? It all hinges on security. If you don't feel safe, then everything else falls down. Like, for instance, right now, Tori and I are doing this podcast. We're doing it in our studio that's off of our detached garage. That's also a guest suite where we do have people, couples come for our little marriage mentorship or marriage intensive that we do. 2-day intensives. If you're ever interested in doing one of those, go to beautyandbattle.com. But if Tori and I felt unsafe right now, like somebody was hunting us, or we were in a socialistic country with a communist dictator, and we knew that talking about God or the Bible or anything would cause somebody to bust through this door and take us off to prison, we wouldn't feel safe.
Right.
Therefore, everything else filters down from that.
Exactly.
We wouldn't be free to do what we do. So that's why this whole concept of vulnerability, allowing yourself to be fully known to your spouse, but doing that on the foundation of feeling safe, is so incredibly important. So what Tori and I want to talk about today is creating that environment for safety so that your spouse can open up.
So good. And I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Connection Codes by Dr. Glenn and Phyllis Hill.
It's so good.
It's so good. And the chapter that relates to what we're talking about today is all about, so it's connection codes. It's just digging into the way that we are wired, the way God wired us. So we're designed for connection, and we're kind of we have these innate codes. Is kind of the way that he words. Actually, it's written by actually a husband, wife, and then their daughter, their oldest daughter, who is a psychologist, and the Dr. Glenn is also a psychologist. And we have all these ways that God made us, and if we can understand how we are made, we can thrive in relationships.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that he talks about is how vulnerability is tied to safety.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that we're coded for vulnerability. That's how, because vulnerability brings connection.
Yeah, we want to be vulnerable, but we don't want to.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It says in this book, it says there is a pressing internal urge to help the hurting, an innate desire to assist someone in a position of vulnerability. We're wired that way, right? Yeah. So you think you need to help. Then he goes on to tell a story about, if there was somebody who fell down the stairs and you see this person at the bottom of the stairs bleeding and in distress and calling for help, there's something encoded in you, something called empathy, that would move you towards that person to help them.
And if you don't feel that, then you have moved the wrong direction. Something is wrong.
Okay, right. But we live in a fallen world, and we cannot always trust people. And we have experiences with people that teach us that we're not safe.
Yeah, you can't trust.
And so he goes on to say that, well, what if you showed up to help that individual and they had staged the entire scene, and then they jumped you with a gun and took you hostage?
Yeah.
The next time you saw someone at the bottom of the stairs, would you do what is encoded in you to do? Would you run to them with empathy because that's the way God made you?
Yeah, you would not.
You would not, because of your experience. And so this is why we now have to take risks. Yeah. Because we live in a fallen world, and our security is shaken on a daily basis. Our security is shaken. And so we have to understand that sometimes we don't operate in the way that we were encoded to, in the way that God intended for us to, because sometimes we have experiences that change our coding, so to speak.
That's why filtering your experience through the Holy Spirit, through the grid of the Bible, through, godly counsel is so incredibly important, because they can you'll get a perspective that's outside of where you are.
Yes.
Like if you're the person on the operating table, you're like, why are you cutting me? This is the worst thing. You're hurting me. But in reality, the doctor's like, no, I'm helping you. I'm cutting that tumor out.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And this is also why our experience with Christ is so important. Like, we have to have real live experiences where our faith intercepts with his faithfulness. Right. So where we are safe. We know that we are safe because we put our trust, we took the risk, and we let him in. We knocked and we waited to see if he'd open the door, and he did. He opened the door and he you have to have those experiences with Christ that would trump your experiences with man.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you live like paralyzed in fear because of an unsafe world that we live in.
Yeah. And that's what happens so much in marriage, is that, people bring so much emotional baggage from their past experiences into their relationship. It's like, well, my dad always yelled at my mom. Right. And so naturally, like you avoid conflict like the plague.
Yes.
Because you don't want your husband to yell at you or whatever.
Yep.
It's like, but you have to redefine that experience. And I think the connection code really does help do that. And that's why this vulnerability and safety, both of these go hand in hand. If you want to connect through vulnerability, through being vulnerable and through receiving vulnerability, then the environment for safety is paramount.
Yeah. I want to read one thing that they wrote. It says, I don't want to be vulnerable until I know you're safe, but I won't know you're safe until I'm vulnerable. Also, I don't offer safety until you're vulnerable, but you won't want to be vulnerable until you know I'm safe. So somebody has to take a risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Therefore, somebody has to take a risk.
It's called faith.
Mm-hmm.
It is called faith. And I just love that. And the two core questions that book, The Connection Code, says that are the core questions that everybody's asking subconsciously is, will you be there for me? And am I good enough for you?
Yes. Yep.
Right there. That whole, will you be there for me? That's security. That's safety.
Mm-hmm.
Am I good enough for you? There's identity, but people, there's like, if I'm so scared that if I open up and tell Tori something about me that she doesn't know, it's like, am I going to be good enough? Is that going to break her heart to a point where she'll leave me and all this kind of stuff? But that's Satan's game.
Yeah.
He plays in that game.
Yeah.
He wants us to hide. He hates vulnerability.
Right. And when they talk about, these two questions, and really they come from attachment theory, which is the theory that as a child we attach a certain way and we bring that into adulthood, right? And it all stems from those two questions: will you be there for me, and am I good enough for you? And if the caregiver, the person that you would naturally attach to in your life, did those things for you, then you'll be securely attached. But if we live in a fallen world, people are not perfect. And so that's not the case. We don't attach perfectly. And so that we can bring those into our relationships to where we unnecessarily believe that our spouse will not be there for them, or that we're not good enough for them, solely based on past experience and not on present truth.
Yes. And I love that, because that brings us into the 3 keys I want to share with you to create safety. So it's so incredibly important that as you're listening to this, that you create a safe place for your spouse to be vulnerable with you. Now, we need to do a whole nother podcast on overcoming your inability and your lack of desire to be vulnerable. That's another topic. But what we're going to talk about is you being the spouse that creates the environment for your spouse to be able to open up and be vulnerable. So you creating a safe space for your spouse. And I want to talk about the 3 keys: emotional safety, physical safety, and relational safety. Emotional safety is this: it's you're creating a space where your spouse can tell you exactly how they feel, and they don't feel stupid for it. They don't feel demeaned for it.
Yep. And
you've probably heard us talk about emotional safety on this podcast before. One of the main things about emotional safety is that your spouse needs to know that you're feeling it with them, that you're going there in empathy. Yep. Sympathy is seeing somebody drowning and throwing them a life vest. Empathy is jumping in the water with them.
Right.
The definition of love is compassion with standards. Compassion is to suffer together, which means if your spouse is feeling something, even if it's not based on truth,
right,
even if it's not based on logic, they're still feeling something.
Yeah.
We'll get down there and feel it with them. You feel what they feel. But the key is, in that moment, emotional safety looks like you not responding in logic, but you responding with emotion.
Right.
Like, okay, if Tori said, Jason, when you wear black sweatshirts, it makes me feel anxious. Like I feel so anxious, like I'm going to have a panic attack. Now I can go in and logically tell her why black sweatshirts don't cause anxiety, but that's not going to help her. If I respond with logic, when she's communicating to me with emotion, we're going to miss each other. That is not emotional safety. I have to then respond with emotion. Like, wow, if I felt like I was going to have a panic attack, I would hate it.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to feel that way.
Yeah. One thing that the book talks about, and I think it's important to know and to understand, is that emotions come from the limbic system, but thoughts come from the cortex, so from your brain. So your thoughts you feel before you think.
Yeah.
And so we don't have control over our emotions. You just feel them.
Yeah, you feel them.
But you do have control over your actions. You do have control over your thoughts.
Yeah.
But when you feel something, you just feel it. Mm-hmm. It's just a feeling. And to diminish a feeling is very exasperating in relationship.
Right.
Because it's like, don't feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. Why would you feel that way? Right?
Yeah.
Like that's
so disconnecting.
It's so disconnecting. You say, oh, okay, I wonder why you feel, I wonder why you're feeling that way. Can you talk to me more about where this is coming from? When did you start feeling it? Right? Like it's asking.
Because if I felt that, it would be terrible.
Yes.
Like, I hate that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just so important that when you're thinking about emotions, to understand that they're just feelings. They're not always true, but they feel very true.
Yeah.
And so even though you don't want to just jump into a logic and say, oh, that's ridiculous, and just dismiss the emotion.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
It's important that you understand, okay, you're feeling that way. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. And that's emotional safety. That's the first key. The second key is physical safety. Now, obviously, I'm not talking just about physical safety in terms of you want to make sure that, if your spouse is opening up to you, they need to know you're not going to beat the crap out of them. So, obviously physical safety that way. But what I'm talking about is body language.
Yeah, so important.
Researcher Albert Mehrabian, he first broke the components of face-to-face conversation. And this was way back. And he's the one that came up with the 55-38-7 rule.
Okay.
55% of what we communicate is done through body language. 38% is done through vocal, which is like the tone of our voice. And only 7% is the words we use.
Wow.
So when your spouse is talking to you and they're vulnerable and then you're communicating back with them, it's your body language. It's your vocal tone. It's not like, oh, you feel that?
Right.
It's not like your blank stare.
Yeah.
Doesn't it say
Talks a lot
in the
about
book
Yep.
what it happens with babies?
Yeah, there was a study that was done with a bunch of babies, and they had a bunch of moms come in and sit with their babies with a blank stare. They were studying just how our bodies respond to feeling disconnected emotionally through body language. And so they told the moms, you just go in there and you do not respond. You do not respond with your face. You just do a blank stare.
So tough.
And it was incredible how these babies reacted. They started behaving like crying, misbehaving because they're trying to change what's happening inside of that room. They're trying to get a reaction. There's something inside of them that knows something's very, very wrong because there's no response. And then, so these babies were it was complete chaos for them. And then they did, a study where they just simply took the moms out of the room and the babies completely stopped crying.
Yeah. They'd rather be alone.
They would rather be isolated, which is completely against our human nature is isolation. They also talk about how out of all living things, humans do not deal with being isolated at all. Like the way that different animals can cope with it much, much better than humans.
Yeah.
We just do not deal well with isolation. And they're saying that the babies were better off isolated than to be met with a blank stare.
That's just crazy. And that goes hand in hand with the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference.
Yeah.
So when you're listening to your spouse, you're empathizing, you're feeling it, you're getting into it, you're full locked eye contact.
Yeah.
You're smiling, you're laughing, you're crying, you're hugging, you're doing all this stuff. And only 7% of the words. The rest of it is just you being there. So that's physical safety. So
I just wanted to add to this as I was reading this. So, with your kids, I mean, every mom out there knows the feeling of, Mom, watch me, just the constant when kids are small, watch me, right? Because there's a cry for identity. Do you see me? Do I exist? Am I good? Like there's all those core human needs that Kathy talks about is you see it with your kids firsthand when they're little. And it's just a constant, are you watching me? Come and see me, approve of me, right?
That's those two questions, am I safe with you? And do you approve of who I am?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, will you be there for me? And do you approve of who I am?
Yeah. Yeah. And that you just see it with kids constantly. And it's so hard as a mom, to constantly react and to respond, right? Because we have so much else going on.
Yeah.
But yet, there's a real core need for connection that you see. So it's so apparent in kids. And, we're all kids. We're just, some of us are more mature than others, but we've got that in us where we're like, where we have that cry for attention and that cry for connection. And I saw it the other day. One of my kids, I won't mention who it is, but I had one of my kids, I was upstairs, I was doing laundry, and I didn't even notice this. This is so sad. And it honestly broke my heart because then I was reading this literally the next day. And actually I was reading it that day. I caught myself. And the child was dancing, trying to get my attention, just dancing right in front of me. But I was totally zoned out, thinking about the 100 things I have to do. And finally they said, I have been dancing in front of you for the last 5 minutes and you haven't said anything.
What kind of dancing are we talking about here?
They're just going, just trying to get mom's attention. And I thought, oh my goodness, like it's so easy to just get caught up in all the things that need to get done.
And our phones.
Put
it away.
Because we're so easily accessible to people. And there's a constant, there's so much demand from the phone. And there's so, like, what you have to do. There's just, it's so much. And this child was trying to just get a little bit of a reaction from mom, but I was unavailable to them.
Yeah. Well, and that was really nice of Tori to cover for me that way. It was actually me that was dancing. I was doing my Barney dance, Chris Farley and Patrick Swayze.
Yeah.
Chippendales. No.
It was that kid.
Not really. But still, so we've got the 3 keys to creating safety. You've got emotional safety, you've got physical safety, and lastly, you have relational safety. Mm-hmm. That's where you seek to understand everything that your spouse is feeling in that moment. And that they know that they are the priority.
Yeah.
That is key, that there's no competing affections. If your spouse knows that they are 100% the top priority, there's no competing affections. It's not like, if you're talking to your husband and you think he'd rather be watching a game or whatever, then he's not creating an environment of relational safety for you. And vice versa, if he feels as though that he's taken too long to explain his thing, or maybe he's a little too overexcited and you've got some things to do with the kids. Yeah, and so all of that stuff really plays into it. But creating that place of relational safety, which is you are my priority. Mm-hmm. You're my number one priority. I'm not pulling my phone out. I'm not sitting here trying to, do a blog post or a Instagram post or any type of thing right now. I'm just listening to you. Yep. We're just hanging out.
Yeah.
That's relational safety.
Yep.
So if you're going to be intimate with your spouse, which is fully known and fully accepted, you've got to be vulnerable, but you have to create an environment of safety if your spouse is going to be vulnerable. And to do that, you need emotional safety, you need physical safety, you need relational safety. Those 3 things will help more than anything in the world.
I love it. So good. Okay, so I'm going to share a quick recipe.
Yeah.
We went to a Christmas party that we go to every year at Dave and Lori's house. I think it was like was it 15?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of years that we've all joined together at Dave and Lori's house. They do a white elephant party. It's super fun. And they always do like A through F brings appetizers. I'm always in the appetizer category. Never once have I won the best appetizer award, but this year
she did it.
I did it, and I'm going to share the recipe with you. It's super easy and it's so good. All it is,
it was great. I ate way too many of them.
They're bacon wrapped dates, and the dates are stuffed with cream cheese.
Okay,
super simple. All you do is you take a date, you cut it in half, you remove the pit, stuff it with goat cheese. You can get the kind that looks kind of like cream cheese, where it's like in a log. Not the crumbled goat cheese. You stuff a little bit
stuff it
into the half of a date. So you're just doing a half a date. And then you wrap it with a half a slice of bacon, not cooked.
Not a full slice.
The regular thin bacon. Wrap that thing around the date, which is stuffed with the cream cheese. Stick it with a toothpick. Bake it. I'll give you guys, I'll write it out for you guys on Jason Tori Instagram. I think it's like $4.25 for like 15 minutes. That's it. Boom. Done.
Oh, it's incredible.
It was so good. Everyone loved it. And it was a winner.
It was a winner.
Bacon
dinner.
Appetizer.
Because everything is better with bacon. All right. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us. Look, have yourself a great Christmas. Tori and I will be back. I'm not sure exactly when we'll be back, but it'll be in a few weeks. It may or may not be before or after Christmas. We'll figure out when. And we've got something really cool coming out for Valentine's Day that we're planning early. We're going to be releasing a 5-day marriage challenge. And so we're really pumped. We're also recording a marriage course right now that it's a companion to our book. So we got a lot of stuff going on, but we'll be back with you. In the meantime, don't forget, rate, review, subscribe. And I don't really have anything else to say. I just want to say,
either.
I love you. Let's just be done.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
There you go. You didn't even say happy holidays.
I know.
There you go.
I'm so brave.
Merry Dadgum Christmas. All right. We'll see you.
See you guys.